Brand loyalty is often treated like a shortcut. Find a brand you trust, stick with it, and stop thinking so hard. And sometimes that works. But most of the time, brand loyalty doesn't fail because people are naive or careless. It fails because loyalty quietly changes the economic relationship between buyer and seller. Once that relationship shifts, the same behavior that once protected you begins to work against you. The mistake is thinking loyalty is a personality trait. It isn't. Loyalty is a contract. You agree to return. The brand agrees to keep earning that return. And the moment one side stops holding up their end, loyalty stops being smart. Let's start with when loyalty actually does pay off, because this isn't an argument against brands or against consistency. Loyalty makes sense in categories where failure is expensive, visible, and hard to hide. Products that last a long time. Products that break loudly when they fail. Products where reputation damage spreads quickly and sticks. In those categories, loyalty creates discipline. Take something like a car or a major appliance. If quality declines, customers don't just feel it. They experience it repeatedly over years. Repairs add up. Resale value drops. Word of mouth spreads. One bad decision echoes for a decade. This is why some manufacturers stay conservative for so long. They don't chase constant redesigns. They don't radically change materials every year. They improve slowly and predictably. It may look boring from the outside, but it's intentional. In this environment, loyalty pays because the brand's downside risk is larger than yours. If they cut corners, they lose the very reason people come back. That's why loyalty to a company like Toyota has historically made sense for many buyers. Not because every model is exciting, but because the cost of betrayal would be catastrophic for the brand. Reliability isn't marketing, it's survival. Here, loyalty works because incentives are aligned. But most consumer spending doesn't happen in categories like this. Most purchases are small, frequent, and emotionally framed. Food, drinks, clothing, personal care, household items. These products are cheap to make, replaced often, and difficult to evaluate objectively. And that changes everything. When a product fails quietly, loyalty becomes exploitable. If a snack tastes slightly worse, you assume your taste changed. If a shirt wears out faster, you think it was a fluke. If a bottle runs out sooner, you assume you used more. None of these failures trigger alarm bells. They dissolve into the background of daily life. That's why loyalty behaves differently here. Instead of pushing brands to improve, loyalty becomes a buffer. It absorbs small declines without consequence. Brands don't need to impress loyal customers. They only need to avoid shocking them. This is where loyalty stops being rewarded and starts being harvested. The process is gradual, and that's the point. First, trust is built through consistency. Then habits form. Then competition fades. Then value erodes slowly enough to avoid detection. Prices rise a little, sizes shrink a little, ingredients change a little, service degrades a little. The logo stays the same. Loyal customers don't notice because loyalty reduces vigilance. That isn't stupidity, it's human psychology. Familiarity lowers scrutiny. The more often you buy something, the less attention you pay to it. Brands understand this extremely well, which is why the most loyal customers are often the most profitable ones, not the most protected ones. At this point, loyalty is no longer a reward system. It's a pricing strategy. You can see this clearly in packaged food. Many people buy the same products for years, sometimes decades. The brand becomes a default, and defaults are powerful. Behind the scenes, companies know exactly how much they can change before loyalty breaks. They test smaller package sizes. They tweak formulations. They introduce new versions that quietly cost more per unit. Because failure is subtle and distributed over time, the backlash never concentrates. This is why loyalty to massive food conglomerates almost never improves the product. It improves the margin. Another place loyalty quietly fails is when it becomes identity-based. Some brands don't just sell products. They sell affiliation. You don't just buy the item. You buy what it says about you. Once loyalty becomes part of self-image, the product no longer has to win on merit alone. This is especially common in apparel and lifestyle brands. When people say they're a Nike person, they're not making a quality claim. They're making an identity claim. And identity is sticky. It resists comparison. Switching stops being a rational decision and starts feeling like a downgrade, even when it isn't. That's when loyalty stops protecting value. Because once identity enters the picture, brands don't have to improve the product. They only have to preserve the feeling. Materials can change. Durability can slip. Prices can rise faster than quality. Loyal customers rarely leave, because leaving feels like abandoning something personal. The product doesn't need to be the best. It just needs to be familiar. Another breaking point for loyalty is when brands stop earning it and start enforcing it. This usually shows up through friction. Leaving becomes harder than staying. Subscriptions are the clearest example. Early on, the service works well. The price feels fair. Over time, things shift. Prices creep up. Features move behind higher tiers. Notifications introduce urgency. Cancellation takes more steps than sign-up. At some point, you're not loyal because you prefer the service. You're loyal because you don't want to deal with the hassle of leaving. That's not loyalty. That's inertia. And inertia is extremely profitable. This is why companies like Adobe can steadily raise prices on tools many users depend on. Once a workflow is built around a platform, loyalty becomes structural. Retraining costs time. File formats lock you in. Years of habit create resistance to change. The product doesn't have to improve dramatically anymore. It just has to remain good enough to justify the friction of staying put. Now let's pause here for a moment. If this kind of breakdown helps you see everyday decisions more clearly, the moments where habit quietly turns into overpayment, consider subscribing. This channel exists to slow things down just enough to reveal the mechanics most people never examine. Okay, let's continue. There's another hidden cost to loyalty that rarely gets discussed. Loyalty distorts your internal sense of price. When you buy the same brand repeatedly, you stop knowing what things should cost. Your reference point becomes the brand itself, not the market. A price increase doesn't feel expensive, it just feels normal. This is how loyal customers end up paying more than new customers without realizing it. Brands track this behavior obsessively. They know which customers comparison shop and which don't. They know how much price elasticity loyalty absorbs. Prices rise not until people complain, but until they leave. Complaints are noise. Churn is a signal. So prices rise to the edge of tolerance and stay there. Loyalty doesn't protect you from this. It makes you predictable. Now, to be clear, loyalty isn't always a mistake. There are situations where it compounds value over time. When a brand maintains standards, communicates changes transparently, and doesn't punish you for leaving, loyalty can be rational. Warehouse-style retailers like Costco are a good example. Loyalty is explicit and paid for upfront. But instead of using that loyalty to inflate margins, the business model depends on trust staying intact. If customers believe prices are no longer fair, the entire system collapses. Here, loyalty isn't emotional, it's structural. And because exit is easy, the brand remains disciplined. That's the key difference. Brands worth staying loyal to don't rely on silence. They explain price changes. They justify trade-offs. They don't quietly reduce value and hope no one notices. And most importantly, they don't trap customers. The moment a brand introduces penalties for leaving, restocking fees, expiring rewards, complicated cancellations, it's signaling something important. It no longer trusts its value proposition to stand on its own. Confident brands don't need to trap you. They expect you to stay voluntarily. This is why the smartest consumers aren't anti-brand. They're selectively loyal. They stay loyal where downside risk is high. They stay skeptical where failure is subtle. They reassess periodically. They switch without guilt. They understand that loyalty is not a virtue, it's leverage. And leverage only works when you're willing to walk away. Because brands don't reward loyalty out of gratitude. They reward it when incentives force them to. Once incentives change, loyalty becomes expensive. So when does loyalty stop paying? It stops paying when value erodes quietly, when prices rise without explanation, when leaving feels harder than staying, when familiarity replaces evaluation, when loyalty turns into identity instead of choice. At that point, loyalty isn't protecting you from risk, it is the risk. And the most dangerous kind, because it doesn't feel like one. The goal isn't to constantly switch brands. That's exhausting. The goal is to never outsource judgment permanently, because the moment you stop evaluating a brand is the moment it stops working for you. Once you understand that, loyalty becomes what it was always meant to be: temporary, conditional, and on your terms. And if you want to keep seeing how these hidden mechanics shape everyday decisions, stay here. There's a lot more hiding in plain sight.